I want to welcome you back to another episode of what I branded Pivotal, since these interview style segments tackle impactful CPG industry topics and lessons from the business leaders that live it every day. Within trend spotting content, when I first started YouTube in 2018, I mentioned how the growing energy drinks market, with all of those jolts of stimulation, would eventually lead to a state of overstimulation where consumers would increasingly start shifting more attention towards relaxation. Admittedly, a lot of my mind share given to that hypothesis was likely directed towards leveraging a particular trending agricultural ingredient. And this is where synchronicity between Ben Witte, the founder and CEO of Recess, and I likely began. Yet, this phenomenon continued as we both saw the evolving marketplace in a manner that required brands to market the solution, not the ingredient. And I mention all this separate but intertwined backstory because our great minds think alike dynamic builds extensive layers of insights within our conversation about arguably the next big CPG space. Ben and I will cover how spotting that early marketplace insight helped inform key decisions at Recess that built powerful strategic optionality. We also deep dive into what's driving the better for you relaxation space and how Recess is intentionally building a broad reaching platform business within that emerging category that's inclusive of three distinct product lines, numerous formats, and only slightly nuanced value propositions. Additionally, we break down the strategic differences between what is needed to create a new category versus going into an existing category and trying to capture market share. As a special bonus, I got Ben to walk us through the Recess Flywheel strategy that has been creating more and more rapid retail growth. But without further delay, here is the recent conversation I had with my good friend Ben Witte. So before we jumped on, I was trying to think back to like when I learned about Recess. And honestly, I'm thinking about a grocery conference I think we both spoke at in 2019. I think maybe it was in Vegas. So again, maybe like a year after you launched, I remember listening to a panel and thinking, like one day I'm going to see like a massive mergers and acquisitions like deal involved with this company. Like you guys were going to be a part of this headline when this category like eventually evolves past like an ingredient focus, which again, this is 4.5 years later. A lot has arguably changed. Some has stayed the same. The predicted vision is still, we're directionally appropriate, I think. But just to kill any of the suspense, like Ben's not going to announce that he had some massive deal yet. So there's not going to be anything like that. Unfortunately, maybe when you do have that, you'll come back on to announce that. But Ben, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your day and out of your schedule, and hopefully we'll get into a great conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm really excited to have this conversation. It's been a while and been watching all your content for the past few years, and you're such a thoughtful analyst for the entire industry. So I'm excited to dive in with you.
Appreciate that. So I was thinking we'll start at, kind of defining just in general, like the problem or the challenge or just like what's going on in America. And like I dubbed this kind of like the, United Stress of America, because quite honestly, like the majority of people, I think when they are surveyed and just, we look at both of our lives, like you typically are in a stressed state. I laugh a lot that like I eat stress for like 24/7, 365. I might be one of those like weirdos that's built different that likes it, but it's a major problem in America.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, perhaps it makes sense to kind of start with, the origin of Recess and kind of the insights, that I had that kind of drove our strategy over the past few years. So to start, did not come from the CPG industry, kind of spent 6 years in Silicon Valley at two different early stage technology startups, but, recognized I wanted to start my own company and also recognized that I would be better suited, to do something in the consumer space. I've always, been more of I'd say like a creative at heart. And so I was really interested in, designing products for people. And so in about 2016, I went out kind of on my own to just kind of explore. In 2016 is, when Trump got elected, and it really started to feel to me that we were entering this new period in history driven by technology and was leaving us all stressed out and anxious. And so I just had this kind of view of the world, that we were, entering, increasingly stressful times as a result of a rapidly changing world. In the future that we were entering, people were going to be kind of prioritizing their overall mental well-being, and that was going to lead to a number of kind of lifestyle and diet changes. Um, Demand for products that have a value proposition of relaxation, calm, balance. A reduction in alcohol consumption, which is going to create the opportunity to replace some of those occasions, with products like recess, and then the rise of a number of functional ingredients that were in the supplement space at the time, whether it was CBD oil, adaptogenic herbs, magnesium, nootropics. They were all kind of starting to see bubble up in supplement form, and to me, they all represented essentially consumers' desire to feel calm and relaxed, right? And so the insight was view these ingredients as the input into this new CPG category and space, focused on relaxation in a similar way to how caffeine is the input into coffee and energy drinks, and alcohol, which has a stimulating value proposition, and alcohol is the input into alcohol, which has intoxicating value proposition. And now there's a number of kind of usage occasions within alcohol, depending on the alcohol type. But I've really viewed what was emerging from the very earliest days as this broad relaxation space, which was going to have a number of subcategories within it, defined by different formats, whether it's ready to drink beverages, powders, gummies, shots. Within ready to drink beverages, functional relaxation, mocktails, etc. And so I'd say, from the earliest days, we thought about building the Recess brand to become a brand platform, right? And there's simple decisions, like having the URL or the Instagram be take a recess, not drink recess, right? Because we were focused on ultimately establishing a number of usage occasions here. Obviously, the brand architecture, the name Recess, the idea of take a recess, defining the feeling as calm, cool, collected, establishing the problem state and antidote to modern times, leaning into recess to help you relax and unwind, versus leaning into the specific ingredients, which is what basically everyone else was doing at the time. And so I can talk more about the journey, but to your point, I would say the space has played out similarly to how I kind of expected it to play out. And it's been an amazing journey over the past 5 years, and we're at a huge inflection point in the business, and so I'm excited to dive in with you.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a lot in there, but I think the two things that stood out to me and was something that I think that I noticed way back in 2019. Again, sometimes in which things that I do, like I play out kind of the chess moves or that game theory out there, and I try to figure out categorically or brands that are thinking about things intentionally. And you mentioned two things around even that like small change to figure out like take a recess, which then implied this broader approach to it. This we're going past a ingredient, we're going past a product, we're thinking about this as a platform, and that strategic optionality creates the ability in CPG really for survival purposes. Plus, if you have huge ambitions, really that's what you have to have. And then you think about just the category of relaxation, or just kind of the reframing of relaxation, because I think you mentioned it. I think a lot of people, relaxation to them is like a vice, like alcohol,
Yes.
Something like that. Or it's, crazy people like me that probably try to overstimulate themselves and grind, past the stress. I'm not the flip side of that, where like the people that take both sides, because I don't really do too much on the alcohol side. But like there are people that obviously overstimulate themselves and then overly intoxicate themselves because they're super stressed and they haven't been able to actually grind or hustle their way out of that. But like you think about, also you mentioned the strategic optionality, I think, around just relaxation as a
Mm-hmm.
whole. If it is day parts that you can use products, or if it's use occasions, or if it's just a matter of kind of formats and things like that, is a ton more options within this emerging relaxation space than arguably these, idea of stimulation, which is, mostly energy drinks and
Yeah.
coffee, and then, the alcohol space. So again, when you kind of start to layer on these strategic optionalities, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is ultimately going to be successful, but it gives you the options for you to grow into these big ambitions and these big things, which again, seeing it now 4.5 years kind of play out, like as I've watched, and that, we've kept in contact, and I've been constantly kind of paying attention, like I'm like, okay, we're still going down this path. It might have moved a few degrees here and there based on some different macro or whatever, but like ultimately I'm like, he's going right in the direction I thought. And it's such a great thing to see.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And look, when as you recall, we launched our first product line had CBD in it, so it was a CBD and adaptogen infused sparkling water, which had this brand positioning towards relaxation. And everyone would call us a CBD beverage brand, and I'd be like, I've never heard anyone call Red Bull a caffeine company.
Yeah.
Right? It's about the feeling, not the ingredient. And in our case, it was one of 4 functional ingredients in the first version of Recess. And I just saw like the way consumers were talking about it was more oriented around the value proposition and the occasion, not the ingredient. And so fortunately, so we launched, got off this incredible, a really fast start, both online and then in New York as our first market, focused on kind of the up and down the street accounts there, which I think are actually the best place to build a beverage brand. But I saw the writing on the wall in 2019 that this was going to take a lot longer for CBD to open up than was the conventional wisdom at the time. And so some people call it a pivot. I didn't really view it as a pivot. I viewed it as an acceleration of what the vision always was, of becoming a brand platform. And I'd had my eye on magnesium as an ingredient because there's a brand in the supplement aisle called Calm that does hundreds of millions of dollars a year in sales. And I was like, people are drinking Recess and Calm for the exact same reason. Like, let's go explore magnesium and let's go explore powders as well. And the deeper I went on magnesium, the more bullish, I got. In fact, we identified this unique form of magnesium that no one was really talking about at the time called magnesium L-threonate, which is the only form that kind of crosses the blood-brain barrier, catalyzes dopamine and serotonin production, and has like a mood enhancement effect to it in a way that other types of magnesiums do not. And that became the base of our Recess mood line in both beverage, RTD, beverage form, and ready to mix powder form. And now, Recess mood is over 60% of our sales. The RTD line has velocities on par with Poppy. We're in about 18,000 retail doors, one of the fastest growing brands on Amazon. And so it's obviously a very important move, for us. But, I always took the position that the challenges that CBD presented is ultimately going to be net positive for us because it forced us to become a brand platform sooner than you otherwise would have in a traditional situation, which I think is ultimately going to make us a much, much bigger company. Because I think there's this thing in startups, which is like choosing what the right game to play is, right? Like, we were the largest CBD beverage brand and still are, but it's not that valuable right now, right? Because it's just a constrained addressable market. And so I always took the view as, even if it was open, the right brand positioning was not to become the largest CBD brand, but the largest healthy relaxation brand that you then could apply to all these additional subcategories and formats in the future. So I always had this premise of what I call like the Recess Flywheel, right? In addition to the platform strategy, we also have a true omni-channel distribution model. Where 50% of our sales are e-com, 50% are retail. Now that's probably going to start to shift more towards retail, but I take the view that if Amazon's the engine, to basically all new emerging CPG categories now, because all the media that you're spending to drive Amazon, which is profitable for us, also benefits retail, and all these things kind of compound together and just establish Recess as the default relaxation brand in consumers' minds. And I think, in the early stages of the development of a category or space, there's a massive first mover advantage, right? And I take the view that this is essentially, energy drinks 20 years ago, right? If you think about how, the rise of, Red Bull, Monster, the whole energy drink category, and coffee, it was really this secular tailwind of people, needing caffeinated products to help them, get through life, right? And that was kind of the zeitgeist, of the early 2000s and, the 2010s. But I think, and I'm not suggesting, I think, energy drinks are going to continue to rise, but the thesis is like, what is the feeling of the world now? I think the zeitgeist is more around everyone recognizes that we're at this, somewhat of a turning point in history, and that's it can be overwhelming, right? And I think there's just a number of lifestyle changes people are making so that they can feel more calm and balanced to be able to be able to deal with the world around them. And I see Recess being this brand that's singularly focused on this idea, which I think is important. And I can talk about how I do see other brands go wrong, where they try to have a number of different value propositions under the same brand, right? And I think the brand then represents nothing, right? Versus again, as I've laid out, like we're singularly focused on this idea of healthy relaxation occasions and creating products, for these different moments throughout your life that help you relax in healthier ways compared to alcohol, caffeine, other vices.
Yeah, I think what you see across a lot of functional CPG, and this is coming from a guy that cut his teeth in sports nutrition and the supplement industry. A lot of basket brands, and I think people confuse basket brands with platform brands, where you're talking about a value proposition that you're going to build around that has similar, like you said, if it's products that kind of create a multiplying effect across the board, and then you have kind of the rest of the flywheel across some of the other kind of retail and distribution and marketing and everything. But a lot of the supplements or sports nutrition brands, or even sometimes you see even the functional beverage brands, they have multiple different products that are totally going after different markets, and they're going after completely different value propositions, but they're all kind of bundling them up into this like esoteric kind of like active lifestyle or
Yeah.
whatever that is. But it's hard for people to go all in on one because they're trying to balance it with this other thing, and it's like they're trying to, like you said, if it's stimulate and relax, and sometimes it's hydrate and sometimes dehydrate, and it's like there's all these things that are going across the board that sometimes not interact in the appropriate way that create kind of a multiplier effect. And you get, honestly, I think you get a lot of customer confusion. Like I think that was a lot of the early generation or the first part of this category, and then now you're seeing a lot more tighter companies that understand how to build around a value proposition, build around this bigger part, and then play a key role within that, and actually be able to be distinct and have a place in the consumer's mind for a certain element, and actually them want that to be a part of their own kind of personality or their own accessory to life or whatever that is. And they actually, those brands become meaningful, those brands become powerful. Maybe not in the broad sense of Coca-Cola or something like that, but I think arguably that's where everything moves. This is where I made a comment several years ago around the death of like billion-dollar CPG brands, and that's not to say that there's not going to still be more. There is every day that we notice there's breakthrough brands, but maybe it's because you are trying to be so tight with the customers that there is a natural ceiling that's okay, because you want to just make sure that you are attaching yourself to a thing. Now, I would argue in your case, there is boundless opportunity, because I think this is not necessarily like you've set yourself, like you said, in the right game or in the right place that like it has such longevity. There's a generational change that is just creating a lot of these effects. If it's the millennials into Gen Z, you mentioned energy drinks, that was like kind of Gen X and millennials. Like I feel like it's a perfect time we're having this like kind of combination of new desires and interests and kind of forces economically that are starting to bring it all kind of together for relaxation to be this next big platform, this big space that is, people are going to build within for the next
Yeah.
25 years.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, Look, I took this point of view, which is in CPG, you're either entering an existing category and trying to capture market share, and that requires a certain business plan, and also a certain type of strategy, or you're trying to create a new category, and lead the development of a category. And the new categories are driven by changes in society and kind of new secular trends that change consumer preferences. And there just haven't been that many new categories, right, that have come around over the past 40 years, right? You had soda, drinks that are focused on taste and refreshment. You had sports drinks, with Gatorade and Powerade. You had energy drinks, with Red Bull and then Monster. You've had kind of gut health, whether it's kombucha and now Poppy and Olipop. Even though I consider them better for you soda, I don't even view them as primarily gut health companies anymore. You had the plant based trend, which I do think was more of a fad, and that was based on, I guess, consumers' desire to buy products that are positioned as less impactful on the environment. But I think the next major secular trend is essentially basically people focusing on their mental wellness, demanding for products that help them reduce stress, relax, and also alcohol alternatives, right? Because I view that as a subsegment within here. Fundamentally, one of the primary reasons people are drinking less is because of mental health, right? They think it's actually counterproductive to their mental wellness. There's also obviously physical wellness. Their most alcoholic beverages are high in calorie and sugar, but mental wellness is a big factor there, which is why I think it's interesting. We're a brand that plays in the alcohol aisle and the supplement aisle. There's no brand that does that ever, right? And that's because our mocktail line, which we can talk about, is has this relaxation benefit to it. It's just a seamless part of the Recess platform.
Yeah, I think on the mocktail side, so I'll be the first to admit, I think when I first saw this is probably a handful of years ago, a lot of the, you know, um, non-alcoholic beer, the mocktails, all these types of things. Like I was not necessarily that I didn't understand it. It's that I thought to myself, well, what they're trying to get to or what they're trying to mimic, because again, a lot of times I think when
Mm-hmm.
functional CPG, especially the supplement space, you're mimicking effects of something that's a vice, or maybe it's, you know, I'll say this and God forbid somebody will be like, oh, my pharmaceuticals or something like that. You're looking for this like thing, but in a more, kind of natural or I guess benign way.
Mm-hmm.
But when, if it was some of these kind of functional, euphoric, kind of nootropic drinks initially, I was like, well, I know what could be put in those beverages compared to a powdered supplement mix. And like people are paying up, god awful amounts of money at the beginning. And I was like, why don't they just mix a supplement up or
Yeah.
whatever? Because again, like I knew these things existed or I knew these ingredients existed in certain things, but it's not necessarily that the product or the ingredients existed. It's that I guess the use occasions or when they could be appropriately put within a consumer's mind was completely different. You wouldn't mix up something in a shaker. Maybe some crazy people like me that would do something like that, but I don't think typically you're going to go to a bar and mix up a little powder or whatever that is. And I started to understand, through I think even Athletic Brewing and just kind of how they were approaching it in maybe a taste way and trying to just reconfigure across some of these secular trends and say like we have a place now within this realm. And now I look years later and I'm like, a lot of this stuff was like I just didn't do a good job at playing out like what this meant from a societal standpoint, or like why these had a place in the world and why they made sense. But now it makes so much sense. And then you talk about the RTD mocktails, and I think the disruptions across the board, and usually a lot of times these are played out in remixes across the categories. Like you could start to follow one disruption, you go, okay, you play this into a different play, and
Yes.
you go, okay, Athletic Brewing is disrupting traditional beer, and then RTD cocktails are also kind of disrupting the typical alcohol, if it's spirits or if it is beer or wine. And then you have, RTD mocktails that then you would think maybe would be disrupting or be the next wave of even non-alcoholic. And again, I think that you're taking from so many different areas, but I do think even people like athletic brewing or whatever, like there's a natural jump sometimes, I think, into this new RTD mocktail category now.
Yeah. So I'll talk about kind of the journey to how we launched the mocktails. So look, I'd say, I think COVID was a big accelerant for the alcohol alternative space. I think there's this narrative out there that everyone was just drinking more during COVID. And I don't think that's accurate. I think there were some people that were drinking even more than they were pre-COVID, but there were a lot of people that were drinking less, right? And what we saw is that, by far the primary use case for, recess mood and recess CBD became kind of weeknight evening relaxation instead of a glass of wine. And so I started, and that was also around the time athletic brewing was really accelerating. And, I developed a pretty simple thesis, which was any alcoholic product or category, would have a non-alcoholic counterpart on the other side, right? Athletic brewing really recatalyzed the non-alc beer space. My grandpa used to drink, O'Doul's when I was growing up. So it was something that was always around, but I think athletic brewing is what, catalyzed that space. And, the non-alc beer space has an interesting dynamic in that it's very easy for every established beer brand to launch a zero proof extension, which in some ways I think athletic brewing benefits from, because it helps build space for them, at retail. However, they're competing against Heineken Zero, Guinness Zero, Peroni Zero, Bud Zero, Corona Zero that have massive, budgets. And then what are the other, categories within alcohol? It's, spirits, wine, and then you saw the rise of, hard seltzer and RTD cocktails. And I'd say pretty skeptical on how big spirits can get. I think on premise, non-alc spirits makes sense. I'm a little skeptical of, just how big, that category can get, at home. And non-alc wine is still early, but, RTD cocktails is really the fastest growing, category in alcohol, driven by, high noon. And if you looked at, consumers' taste profile, like demands within alcohol is clearly shifting towards, more spirit forward, flavor forward flavors. And so, I'm like, RTD mocktails are going to become a thing. To your point earlier, everyone that was playing within, that space, they weren't even positioning themselves as mocktails, were these elixirs and euphorics. I'm like, I don't even think consumers know what that is, versus, the secret to non-alc beer was it's a very simple value proposition to understand. It's beer without the alcohol. Tastes like beer without the alcohol, right? And so as you see with our brand positioning on the mocktails, the gap we saw was to recreate the most popular cocktail flavors without the alcohol and enhanced with, our relaxation ingredients, which the data suggests is actually a key value proposition people are looking for when deciding, what alcohol alternative to choose. And so we first tested a limited edition recess margarita in dry January 2021. And it sold out immediately. People are obsessed with it. I'm like, okay, there's something here. We had already, just launched recess mood beverage and powders. But I viewed the RTD mocktail opportunity as too big to pass up, and just very well suited for our brand platform. And so we spent some time developing that line, and we launched our mocktail line in May of 2023, and it's already well over 30% of our sales. We're by far the number one RTD mocktail brand. When you take, especially when you take into account Amazon. Just launched them, Safeway, Wegmans, Fresh Market, many major retailers, and we're seeing great velocities. And it's still figuring out like where are these going to be merchandised. Like at Safeway, we're in the alcohol aisle right next to High Noon and White Claw, which we like, right? Because I think this is another underappreciated part. I view these as incremental to an alcohol purchase, right? The bigger trend here, I don't even like the term sober curious. right?
Mm.
I think the much bigger trend is alcohol moderation, not elimination, which means people are drinking, fewer nights per week and fewer drinks per night. And when they are drinking, they're switching off, in between, an alcoholic beverage and a non-alc beverage. Traditionally, that non-alc beverage is going to be like a LaCroix or a water or a Coke, right? But I think increasingly it's going to be things like, recess, whether it's mood or the mocktails, or athletic brewing. Like athletic brewing talks about this all the time. Like most of the people that are drinking athletic brewing also drink alcohol. And so, to your point, I wanted to, I studied, athletic brewing, and I wanted to remix, some of the aspects of what they were doing, in our own way. And, look, the benefit that we have with our platform strategy is we have this established brand awareness, right? Through the, CBD and mood lines, through our, distribution both on e-com and at retail across, it was 15,000 doors at the time. Now it's, close to 20,000. And so, the retailers know who we are. We're demonstrating strong velocities. Consumers know who we are. It makes sense as like a sub value proposition, within recess. And the final point on the mocktails is we see them playing in more kind of social usage occasions, right? So where recess mood and is more kind of weeknight evening relaxation, we see these playing more at the times you would drink a high noon, a White Claw, RTD cocktails. And I just think it's almost going to be rude to have a party in the future and not have alcohol alternatives. That's going to be, I think, where we're going. The question is like, what is that, non-alc drink? And I think that's shifting from, again, LaCroix and soda, to things like our mocktails and athletic brewing and many others.
Yeah, you made a comment around kind of the merchandising and where that fits. And I do think, the good thing I think about the non-alcoholic beer space is that, especially athletic brewing, is I think they are, in a way, solving a lot of that for brands like you, where you can go and say, look what you did there. You see the velocities when you put it next to, the alcohol section, or maybe you put it in a different section. Like, we are basically, taking that in the similar sense. So in the same aisle, we should play that same role across the board if it's high noon or whatever, because that just makes a lot more sense. Where like, if you were the one that had to lead a lot of those conversations, it's tough because you are kind of trying to figure out where in this grocer do we fit? Where do we think? And you're testing a lot of that, and I'm sure you still are. But I think there's at least a little bit of a business case, or at least of a little bit of a model in which, oh, okay, I could see what they're doing, and that makes sense to me. I could kind of go with that. And maybe this rolls into, and that's just kind of one little tiny part. But you mentioned earlier around, the difference between building within an existing category and then starting your own category, and like what that actually takes. And I'm also just thinking about the last point you made around the mocktail side, and how arguably people eventually are going to have a point in their lives that they have to serve these products, or they're going to be thought of as rude, or not ignorant to like the needs of people or whatever. And even how do you build that, even, I guess, expectation or just that conditioning at an early stage of even like college? I'm thinking about like when drinking and those things start to become such a, supplanted into your lifestyle. And I know when I was in college, I mean, nobody was drinking any non-alcoholic stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't the thing. But my assumption is that has changed,
Yes.
and it's going to continue to change. So as you're building out not only the mocktail side, but just the category and the space as a whole, is part of the strategy really getting into like the early parts of the consumers, like modeling or their patterns? Because again, college, I think, is such a point of adulthood that then you start to really either decide, am I going to adopt some of my parents' ways, or am I going to adopt some of my own ways? And how am I going to live my life during the future? So like, that's such I think, an inflection point for your brand to like get people in on your, proposition, your platform, your everything about what you're trying to push. And naturally, I think those consumers are already like, their brains are going in that direction because of some other like big secular trends. But
Yes.
like, are you guys focusing a lot on like that younger consumer?
I wouldn't say college specifically. Yeah, we definitely see it a lot. Like we did USC, the USC Trojans reached out to us they wanted to serve the mocktails, at the stadium, at the Coliseum, alongside, the non-alc beers. And so we did that deal. And so we did focus on, USC frats and sororities,
Mm.
for a bit. And we definitely have, a Gen Z and millennial consumer. I wouldn't say a huge focus has been, on college yet. But, to your point, this trend is undeniable. Like younger people are drinking less, people are drinking less, or there's a large segment of people drinking less overall. And so, going back to the retail question, the merchandising question, every retailer knows the alcohol alternative and moderation trend is a big trend. Now the question is like, where are these different segments within it going to be merchandised is a separate question from, is this a thing? And I think that's different than a lot of other, new category plays where I think it's still unclear whether there's actually something here and, how big that market can be versus in this instance, I think everyone recognizes it's a real market. But it's a question of, and, non-alc beer is very well established, but, how is the rest going to play out? And so I think that's evolving in real time, and I think it will mature into a specific subcategory. I think there's this other point, which is like I think there's a lot more brand platforms than people give credit for. Topo Chico, Gatorade, Prime, now they become platforms later in their evolution, right? But like, do these brands? The number of subsegments that end up emerging within these broad spaces is significant. You look at sports hydration, with like rapid hydration, zero sugar, Gatorade's protein bars, tablets, powders, et cetera, because they're just trying to own that feeling and that use case.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Just to kind of talk about the emergence of platforms and just as a strategy, and I think that categorically speaking, I think a lot of times consumers, and this is 10, 20 years ago, pigeonholed certain things into this exact way. If it was like sports hydration, it was like these athletes or some type of athletic event or sport event. And then you realize, no, this is actually something that has broad appeal across a number of different active lifestyles. And within all of those, or maybe even some, alternate uses, like you could start to splinter out or fragment some of that into different, parts that are all within a broader platform. And there's a number of those ones that I think that are emerging, but it's interesting to kind of see them be such a powerful component. And we can kind of look at so many different categories. And I think you obviously highlighted relaxation early on as being that one thing, but even within, I use the term energy everything, even on the stimulation side, where like people for the last number of years have kind of been interchanging across, RTD coffees and coffee at Starbucks and energy drinks and, if it's pre-workout powders or energy powders, like there's all these different things that people are kind of bundling up into this broader kind of, I'm trying to solve a problem. And there are nuances to where that category is kind of starting to go, or all the categories are starting to go. And like, I'm interested to see how this plays out across a number of other ones, because I still think this is a fairly new phenomenon, I guess, of a build process or just how to do that. So again, early on, I think you are in your space, plus it's already in, an emerging space. So like you're kind of, maybe even new spaces going forward will always just start or kind of quickly switch over to a platform over than just going after this one particular thing. I don't know. It's interesting to kind of consider that.
Yeah, I'd say it depends on the situation, right? In our instance, we're an occasion brand, right? There's all these, distinct usage occasions throughout your life where you want to relax in slightly different ways, right? Our stick packs are about taking a recess on the go. When you're traveling in your car, after a workout where you just want to throw it in a water bottle. Funny enough, there's this huge sleepy girl mocktail trend, which is blowing up, which people are using our powders in it, which they're defining as a mocktail, before bed. And we see, a number of other kind of use cases here versus traditionally, look at Olipop and Poppy. They're focused on flavor, right? There's no, you can imagine, this broad platform strategy with those brands because, it just wouldn't make sense given the value proposition, which is fine. Like there's a huge benefit to just focusing. But in our instance, we wanted to be the brand that, basically the biggest brand in the world associated with this value proposition of healthy relaxation across, all these different use cases. And, so just again, taking a step back to, the original thesis of Recess, one was this relaxation space. Two was that omnichannel was going to change a lot. And three was, that the rise of platform brands. And I actually look at e-commerce as key to that phenomenon because it allows us to test, products, online before, we push them into retail in a significant way, like we did with the margarita and even like we did, with mood to an extent. So allows you to, innovate and experiment in a way that's, it's not going to hurt you if the experiment goes wrong. And then look, I think the benefit of platform brands is, look, this simple rule in CPG is the biggest brand usually wins, right? Just like that's typically how it goes. Like people are going to, go up to a brand that they've, already are familiar with or have seen in these emerging, subcategories. And you can see, again, how Monster has done it within, broad stimulation with all the different kind of subsegments that you speak about there with, Rain and Java, the coffee lines, because they're all different, slightly different kind of value propositions. Again, what's happening in sports drinks with the rise of, rapid hydration, and then especially what's happening in alcohol, right? Where, Coke especially is extending, all of their brands which represent flavor profiles, into these collaborations with, alcohol brands, which, just builds the overall brand, for them, right? So it's this net positive. And, that's this concept of the Recess flywheel, with us, where the success of one product, drives the success of the other. And what we're finding is that once we get one product line, into retail, we are able to get the rest in. And so we're going to have this dynamic where you're going to walk around the store in the alcohol aisles, you'll see the Recess Mocktails. In the functional beverage set next to, Olipop and Poppy and kombucha, you see Recess Mood. In the supplement aisle, you'll see our powders. Maybe you'll see something at checkout. There's massive opportunities for co-merchandising. You can imagine, when we add brand marketing on top of this, it's going to benefit, the whole platform and the whole channel. So you're going to have, high return on invested capital, and it's just going to accelerate, this flywheel. And so, I don't think a platform strategy makes sense, in most situations, right? In fact, but I think this was a unique situation, where it did make sense. That's why I go back to, when I decided we need to expand beyond CBD, I'm like, one day people are going to realize is the best thing that ever happened to us. Even though it was, painful for a period of time, I think it's ultimately going to, make us a much, much bigger company because the value of just being that default brand in consumers' minds that has, top of mind brand awareness for this new value proposition of healthy relaxation, which just has, incredible secular trends that are, going to continue to drive it for years to come. And so, I'm just such a fan of all your analysis in terms of how you look at, all these different spaces, because I study them and I'm inspired by them and try and decide, what lessons, to learn from, each segment. It's funny, I'd always call us Red Bull for relaxation, even though Red Bull had a single SKU for however long, 20 years. So, but I took different lessons from Red Bull, more around, the lifestyle brand, marketing the feeling, not marketing the ingredient, aligning with a, specific part of culture. I took other lessons from, other categories and other brands. And so I think to your point earlier around like remixing, I think that's a key idea that inspires how I think about stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the kind words. I definitely think that, I'm definitely the content creator for the people that can understand disparate data points and kind of how you connect the dots and do all that type of stuff. Because I talk across a number of different categories. In my mind, a lot of times they are not necessarily all that different because I think about it layers ahead of like consumer behavior and just, how is society moving in certain ways and what's influencing them and where all those power dynamics are. So a lot of times, like, people are like, how do you focus on so many categories? But it's like, if I look at it from a lens like that, then it's really a lot easier to kind of pay attention to that. So it's, no, I think you made some really great moves. I do think a lot of people maybe misunderstood it for a little time.
Yes.
Now you're making them eat their words, which I love. But fascinating conversation, Ben. I always appreciate the time that we share together and the conversations that we have. So I just want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day.
No, I appreciate it. I always love talking to you. And just on the point of being misunderstood, there's a Jeff Bezos line that I love, which is something like, in order to do anything interesting and innovative, you have to be willing to be misunderstood for long periods of time. Because it's like, by definition, non-consensus, right? And so that always inspired me when people, continue to label us a CBD company or label the category the CBD category. Yeah, it's been an awesome journey, and excited for all that lies ahead.
Anytime we can end on a Jeff Bezos quote is, I think it's going to be a great piece of content. I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. If you did, consider hitting that like button to support me. Also, help me get to my new short-term goal of 4,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. I'd love to see you join me on this journey, but we need to fix the fact that more than 90% of you that are watching this YouTube video right now are not subscribed to my channel, and that makes me extremely sad. But I do want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.